Barbie movie, possibly the most telling feminist text of our time, posits that the defining factor of womanhood is its contradictory and complex nature, to which I say, is womanhood complex and contradictory, or is being a human complex and contradictory, and you just choose to only humanize women?
No, because it is women-specific things that make it so contradictory. Like, we as women live in the knowledge that to men we are objects, not people, when really we are people.
See, but that just sounds like an empathy failure to me, though. Women look at their outgroup's ignorance of their personhood, but find themselves unable to suspend their own belief in it. It's a conflict between their knowledge of their own personhood, but their practical inability to process men's ignorance of it. That is not a symptom of more complexity, but of more awareness of one's circumstances. Meanwhile, they ignore men's personhood just as much as men ignore theirs. Men aren't aware of women to the same extent, not because they're stupid, but because gender roles deliberately keep them ignorant. Gender roles tell men they own everything to gaslight them out of noticing how little they actually have. A few weeks ago, I saw a child on the tram with a dress that said "Daddy's Girl" on the front of it, accompanied by her mother on the way to see the father. That father does not own that child. The mother does, as far as anyone can own their child. The mother doesn't need to be told she does because it's a tangible reality. She's the one spending time with her child, the one who's its main caretaker and go-to authority figure. The father is told it's daddy's girl to convince him that he has any involvement in this child's life, even if tangible reality decidedly tells him otherwise. You don't get to spend time with your children, have attention, love, or honesty from the women in your life, or make the rules in your own living space. But hey, you get to own all of them. Isn't that great too, guys? Women realized that men indeed did not own them, and that there was little they could do to stop them from whatever they wanted to, which is where woman and patriarchy-centered feminism comes from. Without a men's lib to balance the scales, however, this leads to a Barbie land where the Barbies own everything on top of their existing matriarchal privilege, and the Kens have nothing and are just aware enough of it to be distressed about it and radicalize. Telling them they're enough won't solve the Ken housing crisis, ladies. Putting them in cute little maid outfits and having them clean your house in return for living there would. Which one of yous was doing patriarchy wrong, huh? Existing theory backs the contradictory womanhood thesis of them being objects to the male gaze while also being subjects as people. It makes for this weird contradictory and exclusively oppressive dynamic while still centering and subjectifying the male gaze and not asking what woman gets out of it. Very patriarchal of y'all, oh my god. Women also aren't stupid, even if they sometimes want you to think they are. And as we previously discussed, you don't actually need to cater to the male gaze to get attention from men, so why bother performing for them at all? Anthony EASTHOPE, who we talked about in my men's studies video, by this logic argues that men are voyeurs and women are exhibitionists, which I would argue is a misnomer at best, an insult to what women do at worst. Exhibitionism evokes a very flasher, streaker type image, a notion of exposing yourself for usually unconsenting bystanders to see. The focus is on the observer, not the self. You want them to see you, want to see their reaction to you, but you don't actually care that much about what you look like as you exposing yourself to them. Magic Mike would be exhibitionism, men parading around their highly trained but ultimately still natural bodies for the female gaze, getting a sense of power and enjoyment from that exhibition and their female audience's pleasure, more so than from the performance itself. As discussed, women do not expose themselves. They hide themselves away and present their mask instead. They put on an active show, not a passive exhibition. Matriarchy sees women as performer subjects rather than exhibit objects, and men as audience objects rather than voyeur subjects. A performer wants an audience but isn't dependent on it. Instead, their focus is on the craft of the performance itself. If you go out dressed nicely, it's about feeling nice and being admired, maybe even about manipulating others and getting a power trip off of that. But you're not trying to impress anyone. You're not dependent on other people's approval to enjoy it. This isn't about you, it's about me. You're just here to enjoy the show. What the male gaze sees also isn't actually woman herself, it's the image she chooses to show him. He is not the one in control here. This goes down to the naked body itself being carefully groomed, shaped, and made up. In his book, Anthony argued that the male gaze wants to feel in control by looking at all of the woman's naked body at once. But then he included like a picture of like Marilyn Monroe in like a pinup nude calendar, who is very obviously like got like shaved legs and probably makeup and stuff, and it's like very clearly like styled, like not actually in a natural state of womanhood. Censored the nipple. Buddy! This woman is wearing makeup! This woman is wearing makeup and has set curls or whatever, and she has shaved legs. Sir, this is not what women look like. This is a very, very modified woman. This goes to point out men literally don't know what women actually look like. Like, video games and stuff are becoming more realistic and improving on their female character design, and male gamers will get mad about it on the internet because I guess they've never seen a real woman before. Like, buddy! Even that old trope of like, man doesn't get what woman wants because she didn't say it flat out. And so woman gets offended because he didn't read her mind. Woman did her performance to try and communicate the thing. And man just didn't get her art. It's a performer's frustration with an audience that doesn't get their artistic vision. But she also fails to consider that maybe it's partially her fault for not adapting her performance to the audience she's performing it for. Like, what is the point of art if you're not making it for your audience? If a tree falls in the woods and no one's there to hear it, who cares? That is not to say that women need to cater to the male gaze, but if they want to express something to men in their artistic, indirect way, they need to do it in a way that men will actually understand. And that needs consideration of men rather than selfish offense taken when one's message fails to get through to them. Due to various of the factors we have discussed so far, women tend to be very self-centered. They have an increased self and body focus. They also self-police a lot in order to maintain their control. They are independent from men, so they don't need to focus on their outgroup as much as men do on them. As performers, they seek attention for their own pleasure. And finally, matriarchy, just like patriarchy and other systems, sees the self as superior to the other. All of these things are compounded by each other, leading to women struggling to understand that not everything is fucking about them. For example, the sexualization of women's breasts is not about women or their breasts, it's about the male gaze. No one being objectified is ever the subject of that interaction. That is kind of the definition of what being objectified is. Yet women will still talk about it like it is about them, or boobs for that matter. Whether they use their boobs as sexual organs as if it's about their sexual pleasure when people bring up that argument and not that of the straight men who use their bodies to get off to. That men can have boobs too and not be policed for them, as if it's about boobs themselves and not straight men using women's body parts as fetish objects regardless of whether men can have them too. Like, there are plenty of less sex-differentiated body parts that straight men sexualize on women. Various religions and cultures have women cover up their hair for modesty, despite men, also having hair. Quentin Tarantino doesn't make his male actors stick their feet into the camera for his foot fetish, only his female ones, because it's not about it being a foot. It's about it being a hot woman's foot. That people considering trans women's boobs obscene must be recognizing their womanhood and doing so, as if being recognized as a sex object for the male gaze inherently makes you a woman. Straight men's sexual interest in trans women and boobs is well established regardless of what one thinks their actual gender is, and straight men sexualize anyone who passes as woman adjacent enough, regardless of their gender or its recognition. If they didn't, they wouldn't do it to Finster or my boobless asses, or any other trap who is open about not actually being a woman. The femboys would be starving, not making quiche on OnlyFans. And if it was about asserting womanhood to sexualize androgynous people, men who fetishize the trap trope wouldn't be misgendering characters that are actually canonically trans girls. Yet they do. The symbolic phallus and Janus represent and stand in for the power, identity, and status of the respective gender role. They are not actually bound to their physical counterpart, but they do evoke its characteristics. The phallus is separate from man's physicality, so it is vulnerable to removal or corruption. This leads to castration anxiety, the fear of loss of that identity. Antony compared the masculine ego to a fortress to be defended. It is hypervigilant towards the outside, but its biggest fear is one of internal betrayal. Man's image or feelings or desires, the unknown other within the self. Such betrayal would put man in a passive position as opposed to his usual active defense. Passivity is equated with woman who is considered already castrated, castrating him in turn. The Janus, on the other hand, is invulnerable to loss or corruption. Its physical counterpart is built to allow for penetration, so it can't be destroyed by it, and it is firmly built into woman's physicality, so it can't be as easily removed from her as the phallus from man. Woman's identity is not at stake, so only direct violation of her domain is a threat. I will call this penetration anxiety. I posit that where the masculine ego is a fortress, the feminine ego is an ivory tower. It focuses on internal surveillance and control and is fairly disinterested in what may be elsewhere. It happily opens its gates to visitors to create the illusion of total transparency, when really this is a controlled effort to route them away from the things it actually wants to keep hidden. Meanwhile, it relies on its thick walls to keep it safe from whatever unknown other may lie in wait outside. Its biggest fear is those supposedly impenetrable walls being breached anyway, and its sanctum being invaded in a way that is outside of its control. Woman relies on the systems she cultivates. If they fail her, the status she gains from them is put into question too. This reflects in the way men and women do queerphobia as well. They misunderstand trans people as their birth sex and reinforce gender roles. Women see trans femmes as sex predators literally invading their spaces, and trans masks as confused little girls who need to be brought home before they hurt themselves. Men don't see trans masks as a threat and worry about trans femmes making them gay. Alternatively, they other androgynous people by grouping them with the opposite side. Women see them as hairy and dangerous, while men see them as weak and effeminate. Patriarchal power, or the phallus, is not inherently a part of you. It can be achieved fairly easily given the right circumstances, but it can just as easily be taken from you, so you need to constantly work towards it to upkeep your very self. Patriarchy has a mobile hierarchy. It encourages activity. You are meant to climb it to supersede and dominate others, but you can just as easily lose status yourself. If you feel envy or inferiority, you are to take offense to that and do something about it. Patriarchy encourages PvP, so men will take shit out on others. Matriarchal power, or the Janus, is inherently a part of you. It can be cultivated over time, but it cannot be taken from you, so you can rest on your laurels once you have them. Matriarchy has a much less mobile hierarchy. It encourages passivity. You are to respect your superiors rather than challenge them, but your own status over your inferiors and among your peers is assured to some extent. If you feel envy or inferiority, you just have to sit with it because you can't defy the hierarchy. Matriarchy discourages PvP, so women will take shit out on themselves instead. Neither of these systems are a healthy solution to everything. Patriarchy encourages you to do something about a bad situation, but it also leads to vicious cycles of violence. Matriarchy discourages violence, but also makes people settle with bad things and breeds self-harm. Matriarchy hesitates to let outsiders into its full confidence, because doing so would mean granting them permanent membership that can no longer be revoked afterwards. Patriarchy, meanwhile, is way happier to let people in as soon as they stop being usable as feminine sex objects. Whether that is trans masks once they have progressed to a certain point in their transition and become uninteresting to straight men, or even lesbians who get honorary lad status, sometimes to a point they're not comfortable with, because they are not a romanceable option to the lads. If one excels at both one's own skills and those of the opposite gender role, that is considered positive androgyny and therefore allowed. It is success plus extra success, the best of both worlds. Like Wonder Woman being beautiful and strong. Negative androgyny would be failing at your own side, as well as embodying negative traits of the opposite side, the worst of both worlds. If one fails in an area or skill one has no stake in, one can confidently admit ignorance, even more so if one already excels at one's own areas and skills. One of the maids from the local maid cafe recently posted a video on Instagram of her taking pictures with cosplayers at a convention and complimenting their costumes and mentioning the name of the character if she knew it. And one guy was very obviously dressed as Slenderman, and her caption was not sure about this one, but I love his cause. Girl, you're my age and presumably just as chronically online. How do you not know who Slenderman is? Let alone admitting to that on the internet, this openly and unbotheredly. No cishet man alive would dare to do something like this. But she just can't because she's not risking her matriarchal status in doing so. Both creepypasta and horror video games are fairly male-dominated as subjects, so a woman is excused if she doesn't know much about them. And she was clearly already excelling in her own area of aesthetics with the pretty cosplay outfit that she was wearing. There was no stake in it for her. This is the opposite extreme of mansplaining, which is ultimate confidence in faking that one knows something one definitely doesn't. I call it confident bimboism. Ultimate confidence in one's own ignorance with no desire to change or hide it. If one fails in an area or skill one is meant to excel at, if it is a failure in one area but one excels in another, and the patriarchy, this is conditionally acceptable due to the success in the other aspect. Like, a guy can be very strong but very stupid, or very smart but very weak, and both of those are still acceptable forms of masculinity. The extraordinary success excuses the failure elsewhere. And the matriarchy, it is still a failure, and it can even sour the success in the other aspect because it ruins the perfection. Like being kind but ugly, or being beautiful but a bitch. You feel too much pity or disdain for the failure to properly appreciate the good part. This is why I'm a perfectionist. I am 100% blaming matriarchy for that shit. Oh my god. If you do not excel in another area but only present failure and mediocrity, one option is to keep your head down and try not to draw attention. This is the wallflower route. The other option under patriarchy is to fake it or try really hard even if you're still unsuccessful. The alternative would be castration, but this demonstrates that you're willing to strive for the goal even if you're unable to reach it, which is enough to give you a pass on potential for future merit. Under matriarchy, you must admit to and accept your failure. Your identity is not at stake, so there is no existential reason not to, and it demonstrates your honesty and deference to your matriarchal superiors. Regardless of which route you choose, you're stamped as a failure and classed as inferior, therefore a second-class citizen. This is all just damage control to show you won't defy the system even if you can't fit into it. Defying the system by refusing to submit to second-class citizenship makes you a threat and begets worse punishment. On the patriarchy, acknowledging your inability to move up and the resulting pointlessness of participating in the grind set is defying the system. This is punished with symbolic castration as an attempt to remotivate. The phallus lost can be regained by returning to the grind set. If that temporary punishment is not enough, however, and castration is accepted, it's exile instead. Patriarchy removes all of its claim and expectations because lost causes are not worth its energy. Under matriarchy, trying to fake it, position yourself higher than your peers, or challenge your superiors is defying the system. Faking itself is a matriarchal skill. It is used to smooth over flaws in other skills, but it can't be used to fake a whole skill successfully. Matriarchy requires reality. You do need to learn the base level of a skill just to get by either way. And deception is only to be used on outsiders. Trying to lie to your peers or superiors is hubris, disrespect, offense. This is punished with cringe and shame. Like, I saw this woman at the supermarket a while ago, a stick with no curves in a velour tracksuit with the word juicy in sparkly letters on her butt. And I looked at that and I was like, yeesh, 'cause girl, it ain't juicy. Like, I hate to break it to you, but no. Like, a gay man could pull that off ironically, but on a woman it doesn't read as a joke. It just reads as a genuine but deeply misguided attempt at fashion above her body's pay grade. Cringe and shame are used as re-education. If you learn it was a mistake, you may graciously return to your second-class citizenship. Aren't we just so generous to you right now? If that isn't enough, you will be forcefully othered to confine you to your lesser status, whether you consent to it or not. This is not exile. Matriarchal power cannot be removed, so the in-group can't be disowned. Trans guys, for example, once their gender can no longer be ignored, may be othered as men, including to an extent that doesn't reflect their experiences, but they will always be able to claim their birthright. No cis woman can deny their claim to having grown up AFAB or having had a period before, let alone those of us who aren't cis at man passing and will retain tangible matriarchal in-group experiences even after transition. Patriarchy, meanwhile, quickly repurposes trans women into sexualizable others rather than dwelling on them as in-group failures. Instead of exile, you remain trapped and chained in the metaphorical matriarchal dungeons indefinitely. This may free you of social expectations, but it does not free you of matriarchy's grasp.